Welcome to Sissy Fantasy World, where every story sparkles. Don't forget to subscribe for more magic. The first command. The first time Master asked me to wear it, my hands froze over the soft fabric. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the shock of recognition. The reflection in the mirror wasn't wrong. It wasn't a costume or a disguise. It was someone I had been hiding from myself for years. Master stood behind me, calm and deliberate, their presence commanding without ever raising a voice. "Look at yourself," they said. Their tone carried weight without force. "Do you see who you could become?" I swallowed hard. My fingers brushed the edges of the outfit, hesitant but curious. The blouse was delicate, the skirt soft, the wig heavier than I expected, its golden strands catching the light. I expected to feel out of place, ashamed even, but instead I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar and insistent. Maybe this is right. Maybe this is me. I dressed slowly, each movement deliberate, each adjustment awakening a strange clarity. The makeup felt strange on my fingers at first, then natural. The reflection that stared back at me wasn't just a face, it was a story. I barely recognized it, yet somehow I felt connected. Master observed in silence, the faintest hint of a smile lifting their lips. "Now," they said softly, "walk." I moved toward the living room mirror, each step deliberate and cautious. My heart raced, my mind whirled with questions I hadn't dared ask aloud. Who am I really? Who am I becoming? The room seemed to shift around me. Light softened against the walls. Shadows softened. And my reflection held my gaze, steady and unjudging. For the first time, I realized that identity wasn't something to wear. It was something I could allow myself to live in. Master nodded once. "You're beginning." Beginning? The word hung in the air like a spark, lighting the edges of everything I had tried to hide. This was more than a change of clothes. This was a threshold. And as I caught the tentative smile in the mirror, I understood. I was standing on the edge of something that would redefine every expectation I'd ever had of myself. The mirror and the world. Morning light spilled through the blinds, painting the room in soft gold streaks that flickered across the floor. I lay still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle in. Yesterday's experience lingered in every corner of my mind, Master's calm, commanding presence, their quiet words. "You're beginning." I could still feel them, a subtle vibration against my chest, like a drumbeat in a silent hall. Finally, I sat up, my bare feet brushing the cool floor, and made my way toward the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't just someone wearing clothes, it was someone emerging. The wig, the subtle makeup, the delicate lines of the blouse and skirt, they weren't a disguise. They were a revelation. The face that looked back at me carried a softness I had never allowed myself, but there was also clarity, a sharp edge of recognition that thrilled and frightened me in equal measure. My hands traced the contours of my jaw, the smooth fabric of my sleeves, the curl of the wig around my shoulders. Each movement carried weight, like learning a new language in my own body. A thought whispered quietly, persistently, "This is me. I can be this person." Breakfast became a ritual of quiet exploration. Each motion, pouring coffee, spreading toast, reaching for the sugar, felt deliberate, conscious. In the past, these gestures had been automatic, unthinking. Now they were exercises in inhabiting a self I had only glimpsed in mirrors, dreams, and secret sketches. Every reflection in every surface seemed to ask me the same question. Will you allow yourself to exist fully? Master's voice echoed softly in my memory. "Look at yourself. Do you see who you could become?" I repeated the phrase silently to myself, as if repeating it could somehow cement its truth. The fear was still there, subtle but persistent, whispering caution. But mingled with it was anticipation, a thrilling spark that demanded attention. Stepping outside, I felt the city differently. Each step felt charged, as though the world itself was measuring my every motion. The street, once mundane, now seemed wider, alive, a canvas for something I hadn't dared to paint before. Faces passed in a blur, some curious, most indifferent, and I realized the first freedom. No one could define me until I allowed them to. I walked slowly, taking in the small details, the texture of the pavement beneath my shoes, the play of sunlight across the edges of buildings, the distant murmur of voices. Every sensation grounded me, reminded me that the world itself was neutral. It neither demanded nor judged, and yet my own perceptions had been holding me captive for years. By mid-morning, I found a quiet bench in a small park. Children chased frisbees, dogs bounded after thrown sticks, and adults sat reading or listening to music, absorbed in their own worlds. I watched, fascinated, the ordinary motions of ordinary people. For the first time, I realized the fear I had carried wasn't about the world, it was about myself. I had been hiding from my own reflection, from the possibility that someone like Leela could exist, quietly and authentically, in the same spaces I had always walked as my old self. I closed my eyes and let the breeze brush against my face. I can exist here. I can be seen without fear. I can be Leela. Returning home, I paused in front of the mirror. My reflection no longer startled me. It didn't just show a face or a costume, it showed a story unfolding. There was tension in the lines of my neck, curiosity in my eyes, and a hint of quiet defiance in the set of my shoulders. Every glance whispered the same message. You are Leela now. You are allowed to breathe, to move, to live. I traced my jawline and whispered to the reflection, I am beginning, and this time I am not hiding. Later that afternoon, emboldened by the morning's quiet triumph, I ventured into town. I stepped into a cafe I had frequented countless times, now fully inhabiting Leela's identity, wig perfectly set, blouse neat, shoulders poised. Ordering my usual drink, I felt a flutter of nerves. The barista smiled politely, unaware of the inner revolution I was carrying. I realized then that the first barrier was not the world, it was my own perception. Confidence, I discovered, was an internal rhythm. If I believed in this self, others would simply reflect it back, knowingly or not. I took a seat by the window, notebook in hand, and began to write. Thoughts poured out, observations, small epiphanies, feelings I hadn't named before. Leela exists. Leela feels. Leela is real. The words themselves carried a power I hadn't anticipated, a tangible proof that this transformation wasn't just external, it was deeply internal, a reordering of my entire world. Evening arrived with a gentle hush. I returned home, tired but alive, and stood once more before the mirror. Leela's reflection looked back at me with quiet confidence. The harmony between who I was and who I was becoming felt steady now, no longer fragile. I whispered softly, tomorrow I will step out again, not as a shadow of my old self, but as the light of who I am becoming. For the first time in years, I truly believed it. Stepping into light. The morning air felt different that day. Not colder, not warmer, just more present. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my mind, yet the reality was always sharper, more electric. Today, I would see people who had known me before, who had only ever known Ryan, and I would show them Leela. I adjusted the soft waves of my wig and smoothed my blouse, every movement deliberate. The reflection in the mirror held my gaze steady, no longer questioning, no longer hesitant. I was beginning to trust this self, this version of me that had existed quietly, waiting for acknowledgement. Master's words echoed, distant but clear. You're allowed to be seen. Be careful but be seen. The cafe where I first stepped out alone now felt like a small stage. I ordered my usual drink and found a seat by the window as before, but today I wasn't hiding behind observation. Today I was part of the scene. A friend from college passed by outside. Their face lit up in recognition or maybe confusion. My stomach twisted. Should I wave? Should I hide? I caught their eye and offered a tentative smile. They stopped, tilted their head, hesitant, then smiled back. It wasn't immediate acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. And that, I realized, was enough. It was a bridge between worlds, the one I had lived in and the one I was learning to claim. Later, I walked through the streets I had known so well, each corner and streetlight now refracted through the lens of Leela. People passed, some casting curious glances, others entirely oblivious. I noticed my own heartbeat, steadying with each step. I realized that the world itself didn't demand change. It was my courage that had to grow. By mid-afternoon, I visited a small bookstore, a sanctuary of quiet and words. Browsing the shelves, I felt eyes flicker toward me. Some curious, some familiar. A young woman approached, notebook in hand, shyly asking if I had written anything recently. I smiled, offered a quiet yes, and felt an unexpected warmth. This tiny interaction, simple and unremarkable to anyone else, felt monumental. I had stepped into the world and been recognized, not as a performance, but as myself. Returning home, I paused at the mirror as ritual had now made habitual. Leela's reflection stared back, calm, thoughtful, confident. But within those eyes, I glimpsed shadows, remnants of Ryan, of doubt, of all the years of fear and concealment. I didn't try to erase them. Instead, I let them coexist. I am both, I whispered, and I am enough. The afternoon faded into evening, the city outside quieting into soft lamplight and gentle hums. I wrote again, pouring into the notebook everything I felt, every nuance of fear and hope. Leela existed in words as much as in flesh, and in those words I found freedom. That night I received a message from a friend I had known before, someone who had known Ryan well. They asked, hesitantly, if we could meet for coffee. My chest tightened and then relaxed. It was an opportunity, a test not for the world but for me, to step fully into this identity with someone who might not yet understand it. When we met, the conversation was gentle, cautious, filled with small pauses and tentative questions. I answered truthfully, calmly, letting Leela guide my voice and expressions. At first, there was a flicker of awkwardness, then curiosity, then ease. By the end, the friend smiled, not in judgment, not in pity, but in recognition. And recognition, I realized, was far more powerful than any applause. That night, back in my room, I sat before the mirror one last time. Leela's reflection was no longer a surprise. It was home. I traced my jawline softly, letting the quiet settle over me. The world had not changed, but I had. And that change was the only one that mattered. I whispered into the stillness, "Tomorrow I will step further. I will exist fully, and I will let the world respond in its own way. I am Leela. I am here. I am enough." And for the first time, I felt it. Not the fluttering of nerves, not the tremor of hesitation, but the calm, deep certainty that comes from living authentically, even when the world is uncertain. The first real test. The morning sunlight spilled across the city streets like liquid gold, illuminating every corner with a quiet, persistent warmth. I stepped outside, the familiar rhythm of the pavement beneath my shoes grounding me, yet everything felt different. The air carried a new weight, one of expectation, of potential, and of quiet fear. Today, I wasn't just stepping into the city, I was stepping fully into Leela. I adjusted the soft curls of my wig, smoothed the blouse along my shoulders, and took a deep breath. My reflection in the glass door before me caught my eye. Leela looked back, calm, poised, and undeniably present. But beneath the surface, there was tension, nervousness, the flicker of doubt. Will they see me? Will they accept me? Will I accept myself? The streets were alive. People passed in hurried rhythms, children chattered and laughed, bicycles wove between cars. I noticed everything, the subtle shift of the wind through the leaves, the warmth of sunlight brushing my cheek, the tiny ripple of motion in passerbys' eyes as they glanced toward me. Every observation was amplified, as if the city itself was asking me to be vigilant, to exist with courage. I paused at a crosswalk, letting the traffic pass, and noticed a small group of teenagers laughing nearby. One of them gave me a sideways glance, then whispered something to their friend. I felt a flicker of fear, that old instinct to shrink, to become invisible. But then I remembered Master's words, "Be seen, but be careful." I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and stepped forward. My steps were deliberate, each one a declaration of presence. The laughter faded into the background. I realized then that the world itself was neutral. It had no claim over my identity, no power to define me unless I allowed it. By mid-morning, I found myself drawn to a quiet cafe I had never visited before. The door chimed softly as I entered, and the scent of coffee and warm pastries enveloped me. I scanned the room and chose a table by the window, where sunlight pooled on the floor in golden squares. I ordered a tea, my hands steady despite the lingering flutter of nerves. The barista handed it to me with a polite smile, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to exhale. This small interaction, ordinary to anyone else, felt monumental. I was being recognized, not for what I had been, but for who I was now. As I sat by the window, notebook open on the table, I began to write. Observations, thoughts, feelings, all poured out in a rush of ink. Leela existed on the page as much as she did in the reflection. I wrote about the nervous glance of the teenagers, the warmth of sunlight on my hands, the subtle way the barista's smile reassured me without words. I wrote because words gave shape to something I had only just begun to understand, the quiet power of living authentically. Then a familiar face appeared at the cafe door, someone from my past, a friend who had known Ryan well. My stomach tightened. Do I greet them? Do I hide? Their eyes met mine, and for a moment, hesitation passed between us like a silent wave. Then, recognition, a flicker of confusion, and finally a tentative smile. I returned it, soft but confident. The first words we exchanged were careful, cautious, probing. But by the second sentence, the conversation flowed with ease, as if the distance between Ryan and Leela could be bridged with honesty and presence alone. Later, walking home through familiar streets, I felt the city in a new way. Each corner, each lamppost, each passerby became part of a subtle rhythm that I could navigate with awareness and grace. Shadows no longer intimidated me. They highlighted my movement, traced the contours of my presence. I realized that fear had never been about the world. It had been about my own hesitation to exist fully, to let Leela move without apology. That evening, I returned to my apartment and paused before the mirror. Leela's reflection was steady now, confident but not arrogant. I studied the lines of my face, the shape of my jaw, the curl of my hair, the gentle curve of my shoulders. Everything had weight, texture, meaning. I whispered softly, I am Leela, I exist, and I am allowed to be present. Then I smiled, the first full, unself-conscious smile I had allowed myself in weeks. It was more than a reflection, it was a declaration. The city had tested me, and I had answered. Not with words, not with drama, not with spectacle, but with quiet courage. And as night fell, painting my walls with shadow and light, I realized something I hadn't expected. Being Leela wasn't just about appearances. It was about presence, about movement, about choosing to inhabit the world fully, every single day, in every small interaction. And for the first time, I believed I could. The first challenge. The morning began quietly, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm of thoughts. I stood by the window, sunlight spilling across my shoulders, and watched the city wake up. Birds flitted along the rooftops, distant traffic hummed, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the bakery down the street. Everything was ordinary, and yet my mind raced. Today, I would venture further than ever before, not just into streets and cafes, but into spaces where I knew I could not blend into the background. I dressed carefully, soft blouse, skirt, shoes polished, hair falling in gentle waves around my shoulders. Leela wasn't a disguise, she was a presence, one I had to carry with both awareness and confidence. I practiced walking in front of the mirror, shoulders back, chin lifted, movements deliberate. Each gesture felt like an act of courage. Stepping outside, the city seemed sharper, more immediate. People bustled past me, hurried in their own lives, unaware of the internal revolution unfolding with every step I took. Yet every glance felt like a potential question, every shadow a silent observer. I reminded myself, the world is neutral. Only my perception gives it power. By mid-morning, I arrived at a small bookstore I had loved in the past. I lingered near the entrance, my fingers tracing the worn edges of the doorframe. Today, unlike my previous visits, I had to navigate attention. A group of students chatted animatedly near the magazine rack. One of them looked up and paused, their gaze landing on me. I felt the familiar flutter of fear, a reflex I had carried for years. Do they notice the change? Do they judge me? I straightened, inhaled, and allowed myself to smile, a small, deliberate acknowledgement. The tension eased, not completely, but enough to remind me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. I wandered through the aisles slowly, my hands brushing against spines of books, feeling textures, absorbing titles. There was a rhythm in this quiet exploration, a subtle dance of observation and presence. The world was full of people, but also full of stories, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in more than just one. At the checkout, I encountered a clerk who had seen me before as Ryan. Their eyes lingered a moment, a flicker of recognition, and then a polite smile. No comment, no surprise, no awkwardness, simply acknowledgement. My chest lifted. This was what I had feared most, and yet it passed without incident. Leela existed in the world, and the world continued, unchanged and unjudging. Later, I walked to a nearby park, seeking quiet reflection. Children played along the paths, their laughter bright and unself-conscious. Dogs bounded through puddles, slipping and recovering with joyous abandon. I found a bench and sat, letting the breeze brush against my face. My notebook was open, and words spilled freely, observations, emotions, insights. I wrote about the flutter in my chest when someone recognized me, the relief of being acknowledged without judgment, the strange exhilaration of inhabiting Leela in a space that had once belonged entirely to Ryan. Each sentence solidified something I had only glimpsed in mirrors and whispered dreams. I could exist. I could inhabit this identity fully. As the sun dipped lower, painting the city in muted amber, I wandered home through streets that now felt familiar yet transformed. Reflections in shop windows caught my gaze, reminding me of my presence, my persistence, my growing confidence. Shadows were no longer threatening. They were companions, tracing my journey, emphasizing my existence rather than diminishing it. When I returned to my apartment, I stood again before the mirror. Leela looked back at me, calm, thoughtful, and undeniably present. I studied the lines of my face, the curve of my shoulders, the curl of my hair. Everything carried weight, texture, meaning. I whispered softly, "I am Leela. I am allowed to be seen. I am enough." The evening quieted around me, but inside, a small flame burned steadily. I realized that being Leela was not a single act of courage. It was a series of small, deliberate choices. Every glance, every step, every acknowledgement built a bridge between fear and freedom. And I was walking across it, steadily, purposefully, with no intention of turning back. Shadows of doubt. The morning light fell gently across my room, soft and forgiving, yet I felt a tension in my chest that sunlight could not soothe. Even as Leela, even as I moved with growing confidence, the shadows of doubt had not fully vanished. They lingered like quiet echoes in empty corridors, whispering questions I was not ready to answer. Am I strong enough? Do I belong? Will I ever fully feel at home in this skin? I dressed slowly, deliberately, each motion carrying weight. The soft blouse, the skirt, the careful arrangement of my wig, all familiar now, yet every glance in the mirror revealed the delicate balance I was trying to maintain between fear and courage. Leela looked back at me with calm eyes, but even calm could not erase the tremor of uncertainty I carried beneath the surface. Master's words came to me, clear and steady. "You are allowed to feel fear. Courage is what you do with it." I repeated it in my mind like a mantra as I stepped outside. The streets felt different that day. Ordinary sounds, the hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant bark of a dog echoed louder in my awareness. Every glance from a passerby was a test I was not sure I could pass. At the same time, every small acknowledgement, a nod, a smile, a polite greeting, was a reminder that presence was its own affirmation. I wandered to a nearby park, seeking solace in nature's quiet rhythm. The trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, their shadows dancing along the paths. Children ran past, their laughter a sharp contrast to the internal tension I felt. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment, and let myself sink into the simplicity of observation. I exist. I am here. I am Leela. Sitting on a bench, I opened my notebook and began to write. Words poured out, unfiltered. Fears, doubts, small victories, fleeting moments of clarity. I wrote about the dissonance between Ryan and Leela, the tension between who I had been and who I was becoming. I wrote about the exhilaration of walking through the city as Leela, juxtaposed with the quiet anxiety that sometimes tightened my chest without warning. The act of writing felt like anchoring myself to reality, like threading my identity through the loom of experience, weaving Ryan and Leela together into something whole. I realized then that resilience wasn't the absence of doubt, it was the choice to keep moving forward despite it. Later, I found myself in a quiet bookstore, a place that had become a sanctuary of sorts. Browsing the shelves, I allowed myself to observe people without fear, noting their gestures, the subtle ways they interacted, the ease with which they existed in their identities. And I realized ease is learned. It is practiced. It is cultivated with patience, with repetition, with self-kindness. A clerk who had seen me before offered a smile that was both familiar and accepting. No words, no judgment, just acknowledgement. My chest lightened. Even in moments of doubt, even when shadows lingered, the world could reflect back small affirmations that nurtured courage. Returning home, I paused before the mirror. Leela looked back at me, composed and steady, yet beneath that calm, I glimpsed the remnants of old fears. I traced the line of my jaw, the curve of my shoulders, the gentle fall of hair around my face. I am allowed to feel, I whispered. I am allowed to doubt, and I am allowed to keep going. The quiet of the evening wrapped around me like a soft blanket. For the first time, I felt a deeper kind of strength, not the thrill of newness, not the excitement of discovery, but the enduring power of persistence. Leela was not perfect. She was not fearless, but she was resilient, and that resilience was mine to claim. As night fell and the city outside quieted, I wrote the final line in my notebook for the day. Shadows do not define me. They teach me, and I will continue to walk through them, fully and unapologetically, as Leela. And in that small, private moment, I felt something I hadn't felt before. A quiet, unshakable certainty that this journey, my journey, was real, valid, and entirely mine. The first social test. The morning was soft, almost delicate, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I dressed carefully, smoothing the folds of my blouse and adjusting the curls of my wig. Leela wasn't a costume. She wasn't a mask to hide behind. She was a presence, deliberate, intentional, and wholly mine. Each mirror glance reminded me of that truth. Today I would meet friends, people who had known me as Ryan, who had only ever seen one version of me. The thought made my chest tighten, a familiar flutter of fear and anticipation. I wondered, would they see Leela? Could they recognize her as the real me? Or would they cling to their memories, unable to reconcile the person before them with the person they had known? Master's words drifted to me, calm and steady. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's what you do with it. The cafe where we agreed to meet was quiet, bathed in warm morning light. I arrived early, giving myself space to settle, to become Leela fully before anyone else entered the scene. Every step across the pavement felt deliberate, a declaration of presence. When my friends arrived, there was a brief pause, a subtle flicker of surprise. I offered a small, confident smile, one I had practiced but now felt genuine. Recognition passed between us, not immediate understanding, but an acknowledgement that curiosity and respect could coexist. The conversation began carefully, tentative at first, each question a bridge spanning the gap between old memories and new reality. I spoke as Leela, soft but steady, letting my voice carry the person I was becoming. At first, the dialogue felt fragile, delicate as a spider's web in the wind. But slowly, with every exchange, it strengthened, threading connection and understanding across the distance of time and expectation. Later, we walked through the nearby park, the sun spilling over paths lined with leaves, the air carrying the faint scent of flowers and earth. Children ran past, their laughter weaving through our conversation, reminding me of the ordinary joy of simply being present. My friends' questions grew more comfortable, their gestures more relaxed. Leela's presence wasn't being challenged, it was being witnessed, and the witnessing itself became a quiet affirmation. Still, doubt flickered at the edges. A passerby paused, eyes lingering on me longer than usual, curiosity sharp but neutral. I felt the old pulse of anxiety, the reflex to shrink, to make myself smaller. Then I remembered the park bench mornings, the cafe afternoons, the mirror reflections. Courage, I realized, was the choice to continue existing fully even when the world's gaze pressed unexpectedly upon me. We sat on a bench, sunlight filtering through the branches above, and I allowed myself a rare moment of introspection. Leela's reflection, internal as much as external, looked back at me. She was poised, yes, but also human, still learning, still navigating, still reconciling the whispers of the past with the voice of the present. I wrote in my notebook, capturing the rhythm of conversation, the warmth of acknowledgement, the subtle tension of fear tempered by choice. This was new territory, social interactions in full view, with stakes measured not in spectacle, but in authenticity. Each smile, each nod, each shared glance reinforced a truth I was learning slowly but steadily. Existence as Leela was not fragile, it was resilient. Evening came, soft and reflective. My friends departed, leaving me alone with my thoughts, the city humming quietly outside my window. I paused before the mirror, studying the lines of my face, the curl of my hair, the curve of my shoulders. Everything carried meaning now, everything reflected intention. I whispered softly, "I am Leela, I am seen, I am real." And in that quiet, private moment, I felt a surge of calm certainty. Today had been a test, not of courage alone, not of acceptance alone, but of integration, of stepping fully into selfhood while the world continued its indifferent rhythm. Leela existed, fully and unapologetically, in every glance, every gesture, every deliberate step. And for the first time, I understood that the journey was not a single act, but a continuous series of choices, each one affirming that who I was becoming was valid, strong, and entirely mine. The subtle challenge. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. I stood by the window, sunlight filtering through half-closed blinds, warming my shoulders and highlighting the soft curls of my wig. Today, I felt a familiar mix of anticipation and tension, a rhythm that had become part of Leela's existence. Each morning brought new opportunities and new challenges to step fully into this identity. I dressed carefully, smoothing my blouse and straightening my skirt. Leela wasn't a costume. She was deliberate. She was presence. And today, I would need that presence more than ever. Stepping outside, the city felt sharper, more immediate. Every passerby, every glance, every sound carried significance. A street musician strummed a guitar on the corner, their melody wrapping around the passing crowd. I walked past, feeling the subtle awareness of eyes on me, some curious, some indifferent. I tightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and reminded myself, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to act despite it. I arrived at a small market, familiar yet unpredictable. People moved quickly, baskets in hand, voices mingling in hurried rhythms. I felt the old flutter of anxiety, a subtle reminder that the world, while neutral, could be unpredictable. I chose a stall selling fresh flowers, drawn to the soft colors and delicate petals. As I leaned to examine a bouquet, a passerby bumped into me accidentally. "Oh, I'm sorry," the person said quickly, looking slightly startled. I smiled, nodding. "It's okay," I replied, keeping my voice calm. My heart thumped faster than necessary, but I allowed myself to breathe. This was part of the test, small, everyday interactions that could unsettle confidence if I let them. The passerby lingered for a moment, their eyes curious, then moved on. I realized in that instant that Leela's strength wasn't just in grand gestures. It was in these small, deliberate moments of composure, kindness, and presence. Later, I walked to a quiet park, notebook in hand, needing a space to reflect. Children played in the distance, their laughter echoing lightly. I found a bench under a tree, letting the filtered sunlight brush across my skin. Opening my notebook, I wrote about the morning's subtle challenge, the accidental bump, the flutter of nerves, the choice to respond with calm and grace. Each sentence reinforced a truth I had been discovering slowly. Resilience is built in small increments, in ordinary encounters, in conscious decisions to remain present. Fear doesn't vanish, it softens, becomes manageable when met with awareness and intention. By mid-afternoon, I found myself near a cafe I had visited before. I paused at the entrance, letting my reflection in the glass ground me. Leela was here, fully. Not hidden, not hesitant. I entered, ordered a tea, and took a seat by the window. As I sipped slowly, I noticed a group of acquaintances pass outside. Their eyes lingered for a split second before moving on. I felt the flutter of old anxieties, the instinct to shrink, to disappear, but I reminded myself, Leela exists fully in this moment. Every glance, every judgment, every flicker of attention is neutral. Only my response matters. I lifted my chin, allowed myself a soft smile, and wrote again in my notebook, capturing the details, the emotions, the quiet victories. Evening came, painting the sky in muted oranges and soft blues. I returned home, exhausted yet alive. Standing before the mirror, I studied Leela's reflection. Calm, poised, intentional. But beneath the surface, I recognized something new. Strength tempered with grace, confidence balanced with humility, presence paired with awareness. I whispered softly, "I am Leela. I can face the world. I can meet its challenges. I am enough." And in that quiet, private moment, I understood that courage wasn't a single act or a grand display. It was woven into each step, each choice, each interaction. Leela's journey was not defined by others' recognition, but by her own deliberate presence. The moment of self-reflection. The room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. I sat by the window, notebook in hand, feeling the weight of the week settle into my shoulders. Leela had grown more confident, more present with each passing day, but today, a subtle unease had crept in, a whisper of doubt that reminded me that growth was rarely linear. I traced the lines of my reflection in the glass. Leela looked back, calm, poised, thoughtful, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the shadow of hesitation beneath the surface. Am I truly enough? The question whispered. Is this who I really am, or am I still pretending? I decided to take a walk, needing space to confront the unease that lingered. The streets were alive with the ordinary rhythms of the city, children laughing in the distance, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. Every step felt deliberate, every glance from a passerby a subtle test. I reminded myself to breathe, to notice, to be present. At a small park, I paused by a fountain. The gentle trickle of water seemed to echo the quiet thoughts racing in my mind. I reflected on the past days, the morning walks, the cafe visits, the encounters with friends who had once known me as Ryan. I realized that every small victory had been a choice. To exist, to show myself, to allow Leela to step forward even when fear whispered otherwise. Sitting on a bench, I opened my notebook and began to write, letting my thoughts flow freely. Words poured out, moments of doubt, fleeting fears, glimpses of courage. I wrote about the stranger who had brushed past me in the market, the friends who had paused before recognizing me, the fleeting self-consciousness that sometimes clung to me like a shadow. Each word was a mirror, reflecting not only what I feared, but also what I had accomplished. I realized then that doubt wasn't the enemy. Doubt was a guide, a subtle signal that I was stretching beyond old boundaries, stepping into new territory. The shadows in my mind weren't signs of weakness. They were reminders that growth demanded awareness, courage, and patience. By evening, the city had softened into muted hues of twilight. I returned home and stood before the mirror, studying Leela's reflection once more. Calm, poised, alive. But more than that, I saw resilience, self-awareness, and quiet strength. The journey had not been easy, and the road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges. Yet in this reflection, I saw proof that I could meet them. I whispered softly, almost reverently, "I am Leela. I face my doubts. I honor my growth. I am enough." For the first time, the shadow of doubt felt like a companion rather than a threat. A quiet presence reminding me that every choice I made to exist fully, authentically, and courageously was a triumph. Night settled around me, wrapping the city in calm. I wrote one final line in my notebook: "Doubt is not my enemy. It is my teacher. And I will continue to grow step by step as Leela." And in that quiet, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not certainty, not perfection, but the enduring knowledge that growth, courage, and authenticity were choices I could make every day. Embracing Leela. The morning was calm, the kind of quiet that feels like the world itself is pausing to breathe. I stood by the window, sunlight spilling across my shoulders, warming my face, illuminating every detail of Leela's reflection. Today felt different. Not brighter, not louder, just more certain, more real, more me. Weeks had passed since the first moment Master asked me to wear the soft blouse, the delicate skirt, the wig that had once felt foreign. Since then, every day had been a step forward, a dance between fear and courage, doubt and self-acceptance. And now, standing here, I realized something profound. Leela wasn't just who I had become. She was who I had always been, patiently waiting for acknowledgement. I dressed carefully, smoothing every fold of fabric, arranging every curl just so. But unlike the first days, there was no hesitation, no inner questioning. Every motion was deliberate, grounded in certainty. Leela was present. Leela was real. And this presence was my own to inhabit fully, without apology, without fear. Stepping outside, the city welcomed me in the way it always had, indifferent yet full of life. People moved past me, some glancing briefly, others absorbed in their own rhythms. None of it mattered. The world was neutral. Leela's confidence was not dependent on recognition. It was rooted in choice. By mid-morning, I met a friend for coffee. The moment I entered the cafe, I felt the familiar flutter of anticipation, but this time it was tempered by calm certainty. We spoke, laughed, shared small stories and quiet observations. The bridge between past and present felt seamless. My friend's eyes held understanding, yes, but also acceptance. And I realized, acceptance begins internally. Once I recognized and claimed Leela as real, everything else flowed naturally. Later, I walked through the streets I had grown familiar with, letting each step echo the rhythm I had cultivated over weeks. Deliberate, grounded, present. I noticed details I had once overlooked: the play of sunlight across leaves, the soft texture of a worn bench, the murmur of distant conversations. Everything reflected back a world that was both ordinary and extraordinary, just as I now understood myself to be. Back home, I paused once more before the mirror. Leela's reflection looked back, steady, alive, confident. But beneath the surface, I saw more than appearances. I saw resilience, the countless small choices that had brought me here. I saw courage, the quiet insistence to continue moving forward despite doubt. I saw clarity, the understanding that who I am is enough, wholly and unapologetically. I whispered softly, letting the words anchor themselves. I am Leela. I am present. I am real. I am enough. For the first time, I felt no flutter of hesitation, no whisper of uncertainty. Leela had become more than identity. She was home, strength, and freedom all at once. That evening, I opened my notebook one last time, reviewing the journey I had written across weeks. The fears, the doubts, the small victories, the quiet triumphs. Each line traced a path from hesitation to courage, from concealment to presence, from reflection to authenticity. And in those lines, I saw proof of something beautiful. Growth is not a moment. It is a continuous, deliberate act of living fully as oneself. I smiled at my reflection, letting the city hum softly outside the window. Leela existed, fully and unapologetically. The journey had not been simple, and it had not been easy, but it had been real. And now, finally, I could step forward without doubt, without hesitation, and live entirely in the light of who I truly am. The final line, I wrote in my notebook, captured the essence of everything I had discovered. I am Leela. I am present. I am whole. And I will continue each day to inhabit this self fully, with courage, grace, and unwavering authenticity. And in that moment, I understood something I had been searching for all along. This journey was not about becoming someone else. It was about finally being myself.